Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3 years servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required. Subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
For an entire generation, people have experienced Star Wars the only way it's been possible, on the TV screen. But if you've only seen it this way, you haven't seen it at all.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
We've been waiting for you.
Hi, this is Megan from Blog Full of Words, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z and Cory Club. This is the podcast you're looking for.
Your insight serves you well.
Hello and welcome to our book review of Razor's Edge on Coffee with Kenobi. Cory and I will be discussing Martha Wells' book Razor's Edge, a very popular Star Wars novel currently available for purchase. Joining us on today's discussion is Megan from Blog Full of Words, Knights Archive, and Fangirl Blog. Welcome, Megan.
Hello.
Hello. Well, Megan, we are very excited to have you on the show talking about this. I know you are a big Star Wars fan and a voracious reader, and you've been gracious enough to interact with us on email and through Twitter, and we know you've got some great insights. So we're just going to kick it off with your overall thoughts on the book, and did it meet your expectations?
I had a lot of expectations going into this one because I listened to a lot of the feminist talk in the Star Wars blog community, and people were really excited about the fact that this was focusing on Leia, and we haven't gotten a novel focusing on Leia. So the expectations were very high for not only the quality of the book, but the diversity of the characters. And I think it did deliver in a lot of ways. It has two female characters. It has one woman of color. It makes sure to establish that there's going to be a lot of diversity in the book. And that was great. We'll get into the plot. The plot was good as well. But yeah, I think it definitely lived up to my expectations.
And Cory, what about you? I think the three of us, just like we had with our Kenobi chat with Amy and Tricia, we've got similar opinions, but the way we get them are quite different. How did you feel overall, Cory, about the book?
Well, I kind of like you said, Megan. You said it was going to center on Leia, and I was excited too because it's like there's nothing really out there that's really just from her viewpoint. She's not my favorite character, but I'm willing to read anything Star Wars, so I gave it a shot, and I really enjoyed it. Going in, I didn't know what to expect, but the setting where it was set between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, I felt it was kind of like, well, what are you going to talk about? Type thing. It's just basically this random, adventure or whatnot. So going into it, I didn't really have high expectations, but in the end, I think it was a great little adventure, some great characters, some great interactions, and then a great female lead. So yeah, it was great.
Well, that was the thing that was the most important to me. I knew that this first book in this trilogy, which apparently is not really much of a trilogy anymore, they've come out and said, but I knew that Leia was the feature character, and I was interested because sometimes I think we as Star Wars fans overplay the strength of her character. That's still something I very much struggle with. In fact, I just talked with a professor last week who told me if I told her that Leia was a strong female character, that she would not sign off on my master's thesis. She actually said that. And I said, well, tell me why you feel that way. And I'm pretty sure that if she looked at Razor's Edge, she would probably change her mind. Because what you've got here is a multifaceted character. And really Martha Wells, and we talked about this on our book chat with her, but she was in many ways restricted by what she could and couldn't do because you've got this character who's just recovered from the destruction of her planet, and she's got these burgeoning feelings for Han Solo and just trying to be a strong character. But we see the vulnerability in her. We see her making these decisions and people looking to her to lead by example and through action. She becomes much more multifaceted that I think possibly we have seen from her on a consistent basis. Did you catch that as well?
It's interesting that both of you say that Leia was not one of your favorite characters. Honestly, she wasn't one of my favorite characters either. I didn't pay much attention to her when I first started watching the movies, and I tend to like Force users more. She just wasn't really on my radar, but she's been discussed a lot in the fandom, and there's been so many different ways of portraying her, from the comics to the novels to her being a supporting character in other novels. So this book was really me sort of trying to figure out what I thought of Leia in a way. And I did like her. I like that they showed different kinds of strength that she had. She was diplomatic. She could physically fight all sorts of things. But also she was vulnerable, and Alderaan was a big deal.
Yeah, in this book, maybe more than anything that I've seen, and I know that there's the comic book series, which Cory's going to talk about in a little bit, but it shows the impact that has, because in the film, now it's called A New Hope for a reason, so it's not dwelled upon. Leia isn't sitting around moping like Bella in that god-awful Twilight series, but sorry, I couldn't resist. But it clearly impacts everything that she does, and it should. We're talking about the destruction of her entire world, so we're seeing a vulnerability and flaws and doubt, and that's an important thing to portray in Leia. I mean, Cory said she wasn't his favorite character. It's not. I actually like Leia. I've always liked Leia. I think when it comes to her and Padme, I don't really know who I'd pick. I'd probably lean more towards Leia because I'm more of an original trilogy guy. But I didn't know how strong a novel would be with her in it, and she was the best part.
I absolutely agree. And like we said, there's a lot of parallels. We talked about this with Martha, about the new Star Wars comic series, where it kind of delves back into the original trilogy era and has the kind of the big three going on these adventures. And it has Leia kind of this, would you call it a secret mission? Kind of going on and going on secret missions and just finding out things. And the comparisons between that, I haven't read the comic series a whole lot. I don't know if you have, Megan.
I read the first volume.
Okay. So I guess maybe a question to you would be, do you find parallels between Leia's character from the comic series and this book?
She's called to do very different things in the series and the book, and I think I do find parallels in that she's straightforward. She goes after what she wants. The book could get inside her head more than the comic did, and I liked that. Like you said, she wasn't moping, but Alderaan was an issue, and it was always there in the back of her head, and sort of the subtlety of how she dealt with that was really well done in the novel, I thought. In the comic, it was a little less subtle, but that could also just because they had to portray it in dialogue. It's a comic. Sure. You couldn't get it in the same way.
Yeah, it's the medium. Did either of you read, there's an old Marvel comic where Leia encounters a stormtrooper and they're trapped somewhere, and he finally takes off his helmet, and he's from Alderaan, and he's got a piece of rock around his neck from Alderaan, and that was maybe the only time that I'd seen in the expanded universe until recently that being addressed in this fashion.
Wow, no, I haven't read that.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never seen that comic, but that's very interesting to me. That's pretty strong connection there.
It really is, and when we're talking about Leia, I mean, I think I've already pretty much said who my favorite character in the book was, but what about the two of you? Who was your favorite character, maybe the strongest character you thought in the book? Was it Leia or was it someone else?
I thought that Leia carried the book well, but I was really happy that there were cool side characters. I really liked Sion, the rebel pilot. I really liked Anna Carrot, because Twi'leks tend to fall into certain cliches. They're the dancers or they're the bounty hunters, and she was none of those things. And she actually sort of disappears toward the end, but I like that because it meant that she wasn't feeling that like, oh, I am a Twi'lek, I am so shiny and important role. But she was just really cool. Like, she was scarred and kind of like buff, and I thought she was cool.
She was cool. What about you, Cory?
Well, I will say Leia was my favorite character, and she did, like you said, Megan, she carried the book very well. And I think, like I said before in their interview, my comparison to her was, I think her name was Laura Roslin in the Battlestar Galactica series. Where
interesting.
It's just because she's a flawed character. She's thrust into a position she doesn't want to be into, and she's just this back of her mind thing. Like in the series, Laura Roslin has cancer, and she's got to battle that in her mind. Along with putting up with politics, all these threats, and then here comes Leia, and she's basically almost a very similar character, where she is thrust in this position of politics and has to be a leader, and she comes out a shining star as far as leading the rebellion in this little group, and then like I said, back in the back of her mind, she's got Alderaan and just the feelings there. So I think that she's a very strong character in this book and leads it really well.
And I'm going to say, I mean, I know I mentioned Leia was my favorite, but just for a difference, because I'm not sure, we haven't talked about him yet, but Han Solo, really comes to the limelight here, and I think the biggest victory for this novel is the fact that you were able to get into the voice of both Han Solo and Princess Leia in a very accurate way that made me feel like I was still in the world between episodes 4 and 5. Like it was something that could have leapt off the silver screen onto the page. And I still think that you don't see that often enough in the expanded universe, particularly with the original trilogy characters. So how did you both feel about the voices of Leia and Han? We can talk about Luke later, because I don't know if that was necessarily a strength, but it probably wasn't supposed to be. But what about the voices of Leia and Han in this?
I compared it myself. I compared it to I'm going to forget his name now. The Thrawn series. What's his
Thrawn?
No, not Thrawn.
Timothy Zahn.
Timothy Zahn. That's what I'm trying to say. I compared it to Timothy Zahn's relationship, or how he writes them, and obviously that's
high praise.
Well, it's very high praise, and because but actually you figure that book is further down the line. They've already developed a relationship. We've gotten on with their romantic relationship, and this. To be able to write that without having that it had to be hard to do. And like I said, it's setting between A New Hope and Empire, and just for her to get inside the heads of Han Solo and Princess Leia and just kind of just spark at little snippets of that, just kind of remind us of what we, like you said, Dan, it could be pulled right into the movie screen and be like, oh yeah, that goes right along with what we've seen thus far, and it just builds on that. So I think it was really well done and very hard to do in this era setting.
I was going to use that word spark to it's kind of a cliche word, but they were angry at each other at times. They were really sarcastic. I thought some of Han's dialogue was good. I don't you guys will know what I mean when I say I don't really ship that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't Han and Leia are not my favorite, but I thought that it was really interesting to get to see them between the two movies, because we haven't seen a lot of that. So normally their relationship isn't something that I really care about. I don't dislike it. I just don't really feel either way about it.
Interesting. Well, I think, Megan, now that we have you sharing a cup of coffee with us, tell us why that has not been something, because typically that's one of the things I know that Tricia Barr is. I think that's one of her things that she likes the most. But why do you take the opposite route? I'm fascinated by this.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked that, because that ties a lot into how I view Leia. I wouldn't say that I take the opposite perspective of her at all, because I don't dislike them. It's just not like a part of Star Wars I was really into. I got into Star Wars when I was a teenager, and I really identified with Luke. Like, I wanted to get off the desert planet too, and he was the character that I liked the most. I felt like I could identify with him. Leia, while she's canonically the same age, had accomplished so much more. She was a princess. She was in politics. She was a soldier. She had done all this. She was like an adult figure to me. So I know there was a love triangle in the movie, but it almost felt like, to me, like Leia and Han were the parents and Luke was the kid.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah. Interesting.
Very mythological of you.
That's just how I saw it. So Han and Leia were sort of, they were untouchable to me, kind of.
And, well, that's pretty cool. I'm happy to hear that that's one of the things, again, I love about talking with all of our intelligent Star Wars fans is there are just so many different ways to pour through this galaxy. The thing that I liked about their tension, because there was definitely legitimate tension in this. The book wasn't all about that, but I think that was where Martha was at her strongest in her voice. It's very hard to accurately capture the voice of a character that millions and millions of people know and love, and they all think that they know the definitive way that that character should sound. I think she was able to find that, and perhaps the strength of this, and we talked about this in our interview with Martha as well, is that she doesn't reveal all of her cards, and the power of The Empire Strikes Back as far as, their first scenes together and the kissing scene and then I Love You, I Know, all that stuff still holds the power and the gravitas that it should, because we see a burgeoning relationship between the two of them, but it's not fully exploited or fully even. Leia doesn't even let herself go in that direction, and it's not always clear what Han is thinking, although we can get a pretty good idea based on what we have for us. Now, I don't think that Luke is portrayed as strongly in this. In fact, Luke doesn't even feel like Luke. Luke just feels kind of like a random rebel pilot, and he also kind of gets the snot kicked out of him a little too easily for my taste as well.
I was actually reading your review of this book before I came on the podcast, and I wanted to talk about that because I agree that Luke was not strong in this book, although he did. Oh, what's our spoiler policy? Are we going to give
our spoiler policy?
No, go ahead.
We have spoilers, yes.
Yeah, he caught the spy at the end. He's the one that knocked Kifar out.
True.
But
not in pretty much the same kind of way that Short Round would get somebody in Temple of Doom. It wasn't like exciting, but I know he's early in his Jedi-ness.
The other thing, I read this, like most of us, I'm sure I read this book shortly after reading Crucible, and the difference between Luke in Crucible and Luke in Razor's Edge is so massive. And it was interesting to me to see that change in how much power he had, because you could see how he had developed and how he had grown so much. I liked that he was less impressive in this book because it showed how much he had grown or would grow in the future.
The thing about Luke in this, and I don't need him to be all powerful. I don't even need him to be remotely powerful, but this is the guy we're talking about that just blew up the Death Star, and he hasn't faced Vader yet, but I don't know. I think maybe in the way that he approached things, and I don't know, he didn't sit well with me, and I sort of expected him to be a side character. The fact that she nailed Leia and Han, that helped me stomach that. I don't even know if stomach that is the best word, but that helped me digest that a little bit more. Cory, what do you think about Luke?
I was going to say, I'm going to make another comparison here, and it might be totally off, but I felt like Luke was kind of like, okay, in Back to the Future, we've got, Marty McFly, and he's going back in a time, and he's kind of hanging out with his mom, I guess, and they're kind of the main characters. And then we got George McFly, the buffoon, kind of stumbling around.
You thought Luke was like that?
No. I thought Luke was more of like a George McFly, like, hey guys, doing his thing. Not that he was like goofy, but like,
sure.
I mean, he just played that role, that side role, pretty well. I mean, I didn't expect Luke to, start swinging a lightsaber like that, and start force choking all kinds of people. But I like you said, the end there where he punched the guy out was kind of like the George McFly moment,
Well, he did destroy the Death Star, but he's also from Tatooine, where the most exciting thing is probably the Jawas bringing all the droids in. So I think he can be goofy a little bit at this stage, but that's just me.
True. Oh, this is good. I'm happy we're debating Luke. I didn't think we'd go this one. That's good. That's good stuff. Listeners, please let us know what you think about Luke's role in this book as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think, interact with the Facebook page. I think in all, I think he's a good character, and he'll have his role, I mean, in the series, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see that too, because I do like Luke, and
he's great.
Yeah.
As we're talking about him, we'll get away from the big three for a little minute. What did you think, you guys, about the role of diversity? Some of the other characters, I guess we're talking spoilers, so it'd be like maybe the pirates, the other crew of the Alderaan ship. What was your perspective on the class of aliens and things like that?
I guess I'll start out with this. I was so happy that there was so much diversity, and just people were casually mentioned, like, oh, this guy's dark-skinned, and then it never really comes up again. That's just what he is. And there were a couple different, there was a Corin, there were Twi'leks. I did think that some of the minor characters blurred together. A lot of them talked the same way. So some of them, I could picture them very easily. But when they started speaking to each other, I was kind of like, who's talking here? I think they could have been a little more distinct, but a lot of them I really love.
That is one of the strengths of the book. The thing, as far as the non-canonical characters, sometimes when you read an expanded universe novel, or really any novel, the side characters that are not as well-rounded, they do blend together, like Megan just mentioned. And I thought there were times, they have this dramatis persona, I think that's the correct way to pronounce it, at the beginning of the newer expanded universe novels. So I found myself continually flipping back. Okay, now which one is this one? Which one is this one?
Yeah.
And I do think it kind of got a little muddied after a while, and I found that a bit distracting. And honestly, 2/3 through, I just stopped flipping back because I just thought, well, whatever. I'm sure I'll figure it out, and I did. I did enjoy and I guess we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I did enjoy some of the major conflicts. Did either of you feel like through the diversity of the characters and the different things that popped up, did you ever feel like there was ever real peril for people in this novel?
Oh, that's a good question. Because going in, we obviously know that the big three aren't going to die.
Correct.
And I guess in my mind, I didn't expect them to die. I didn't expect a whole lot of action, which there was some shootouts. I mean,
there was more action than Kenobi, probably.
Well, I was just going to say, there's some shootouts, and I think there's a cantina scene where they're shooting out, some quick draw stuff, and I think, like you said, Dan, the peril is there, but it's not all much for like the big characters. We know they're going to live through it.
Did either of you feel like though that the Alderaanians, that they were in danger? I thought I was ready for something big to happen to them. So yes.
Well, we get a major death like halfway through.
True.
Which sort of shows
raises the bar.
Mm-hmm, shows that people can be killed. It's interesting that you mentioned whether or not you were worried about the main characters or whether you thought there was enough peril, because I think in Star Wars novels, that's not always so much a concern for me. Like in Kenobi, we knew Obi-Wan would survive, but what was more interesting was how the characters would get to where they were going, and in Razor's Edge, it was how are they going to get caught? Like, I really liked that the bad guy was a Lordian, because she was a big challenge for Leia's diplomatic skills. And there's a scene toward the beginning where Leia has to control all of her expressions and control exactly how much truth she tells. So it was almost like I wasn't worried about Leia dying, but I was worried about her getting really embarrassed.
That's hilarious.
Well, and I never thought about this, again, the power of discussion. But when Leia has to control her emotions, it's very prequel Jedi, isn't it?
That's interesting.
Level off your emotions and hide that, and it reminded me a lot of 1984, actually, thought crimes and how you're not supposed to convey certain types of emotion, or you can be perceived. And they, of course, were reading Leia's face, and she's such a diplomat and a politician. It's a part of her DNA. It's a part of how she was raised. So that was an interesting aspect of it as well. But Cory, we didn't get it much. We kind of got away from it. But how'd you feel about the role of diversity in the book? Very important. And Star Wars is an excellent galaxy to have diversity because there's so many different types of characters and races and people.
Yeah, and I think every time I go into a Star Wars book, it seems like there's always the token Twi'lek and token characters, and you're like, oh, we have to put those in there because it's a Star Wars book, So like you said, Dan, it's like some of those characters, they blended the background. They weren't so prominent for me. But I did feel like, I wanted to know where it was going. I wanted to know who the spy was. I wanted to know a lot of things. So that kept me engaged in the book. But I think, all in all, I think most of the characters, they were well written. I also think that they just added to the narrative of Leia's story. So, like I said, it really blossoms Leia out, if you want to say it that way. So every character kind of added to that. And we've been saying all along, she just reinforces her character as far as kind of this in-between era where she's kind of trying to, balance her, relationship with Han. And I think it's really just adds to her character in all in general. So it's they were well done, but I don't think they were as strong as maybe they could have been.
I have a question in relation to this.
Sure.
Did you guys think that it was obvious who the spy was, or did it keep you guessing?
Cory, what do you think?
That's interesting, because I'm the type of person who thinks I've got it figured out in the end, and have your doubts, and you're like, back and forth on things.
I thought it was somewhat obvious.
Yeah.
Just because you really don't have a lot of options. But I will say, even though I don't think it was necessarily predictable as much as it was obvious once the big reveal came about. I mean, you could see it coming, but there weren't so many tells that you found it to be distracting. I thought it was clever. I mean, juxtaposed to other things where, the butler did it, or you can tell what's going to happen. What did you think, Megan?
Well, I predicted it pretty early on, and I kind of didn't want it to be Kifar because he was mean. He was mean to Han all the time. It just seemed really obvious to me that not that he didn't want to be there, but that he didn't like being there. Mm-hmm. And I thought, right up until the reveal, I thought, he's got to be a distraction. It's got to be somebody else who's nicer, because if he was a better spy, he would be nicer. And I thought it was really obvious that it was him. It didn't take away from my enjoyment of the book, but I wanted to find out what other people thought, because it was pretty obvious to me.
Well, I think so, and I think when we're looking at it, I think the reason it didn't bother me much is I didn't feel like that was her big thing. That was like something that she was going to schedule in there and surprise us. I didn't feel like that was something. I mean, I knew she wanted to surprise people, but I don't feel like that was one of her main goals. It's much different than with Kenobi, and of course, the huge surprise with the pronouns there, and maybe that's why it didn't knock me out the way that the big twist in Kenobi did, because I don't know, it just was a different impact. It had different ramifications, like you said, Megan. Or Cory, he was a jerk to Han all along, so of course he's going to be the traitor.
Like you said, the reveal wasn't shocking, but it's interesting, Dan, that you compared to Kenobi, because it's obviously
it's hard not to, because since they're back to back.
Well, not only that, but like I said, I compared it to the Thrawn trilogy and Zahn's work, because we're immediately drawn into this new world, and it's a different author. It's her first book, and we're curious to see, how she's going to play out this, and it's just written differently. And I would be curious to think if somebody else was to write it, if they would do maybe not such a good job with maybe Leia and maybe a better job in other places. You know what I'm saying? So it's
I think they're hard. The three are, to me, they're very hard characters to write, because again, we all have our very specific idea of how they should sound. It's intimidating. Cory, you're a writer, and Megan, you write too. I mean, these are the kind of characters that you would want to try to tackle. I mean, in many ways, it would be the ultimate challenge and the ultimate joy, but there's so much vested in these characters, which leads me really to, as far as the non-canonical characters in the book, are there certain ones that really spoke to you that you thought, I really want to read more about this person? I mean, for the most part, a lot of them were probably characters that we didn't really matter to us if we saw them or not, but which ones stood out to you and you thought, I want more?
Well, I'm going to go back to my earlier answers and say that I still want more of Anna Carrot, her doing her smuggling thing. Mm-hmm. In my interview, I did an interview with Martha Wells on my blog, and she talked about what further adventures Anna Carrot could have, or I think she said Sion joining Rogue Squadron, and those sounded really cool.
Oh, that would be cool.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of the characters that were in the book, like you said, they were kind of, I don't want to call them background characters, because some of them were, some of them weren't. None of them really rubbed me all that great, as far as like, I'd love to know what so-and-so does, or like to follow them, just because I think that's not what they're there for. I think the way they were used in this book, they were just more of a side character as far as promoting the plot of the book. I don't know. It's hard to choose, I guess. I guess none of them really stood out that much to me to want to follow them along, but that's just me, I guess. Sorry.
and as soon as I realized it was my turn to talk, I still not blank, but the character who's the main big bad in and that she can read faces. What's her name?
I was just trying to think of the names.
It's Viest. I have the dramatis
yes.
personae next to me.
There you go. I probably should have done that. Yeah,
beat me to it.
I'm cheating. Don't worry.
That's all right. That's using your resources. VS would be, if I had to pick a non-canonical character, would be VS. I've found her to be intriguing. I mean, it's pretty much a one-dimensional villain, but I like that she was a good foil for Leia, an interesting challenge for her. I'm wondering what the thought process was to have one of the main villains female. Was it because Leia's a female, or did that just fit the role of the story better?
That's a good question. We could probably have a whole other discussion about choosing a female villain to go against a female hero and whether or not that is restrictive or whether or not that's a good thing. I certainly didn't mind it. I think that she was a good foil for Leia because of her particular talents.
Agreed. Yeah, and they do work well, but it does an interesting thing to look at. I mean, how would this be different if there was a guy? Maybe they didn't make it as a male character because then we would have sexual, even more tension, and then of course Han Solo's peacock feathers would have to come out even more, and there would be a lot more. That would become a whole other sort of a novel then. So I don't know, maybe that would be too much angst.
See, that's not the direction I took. As soon as I thought of a gender bent Viest, I thought that people might think that he didn't have enough of a dramatic death scene. People would say he was too weak if he died where Viest did in the book. But I don't know. That's every fan has a different perspective on that. So
that's interesting. Talk a little bit more about that. I'm interested to hear why you came to that conclusion.
Well, I mean, I just thought of it now. Let's try though. I mean, I hadn't thought at all of the fact that there would be a potential like romantic tension there, and I'm glad there wasn't. And
me too.
If Martha Wells said, "Oh, we didn't make her a man because we thought that tension was unnecessary," I would be like, "Fantastic."
And very true, very true.
Yeah, because that just wouldn't really be necessary. But I don't know, the other thing is that we've seen characters like that who are male before. She's almost a Lando figure where she has a whole operation and she's like running this whole scene. She's almost a Jabba figure. I don't know how many female crime lords we've seen in Star Wars.
Right.
So,
which is cool. And I think that's probably more a reflection of our culture now and where we have evolved from. I can't even think off the top of my head of anything from popular culture or mythology where there is a male hero or a male villain and a female, but there's none of the tension, the sexual tension, but just that general good guy, bad guy animosity. Can you think of any?
I will bring one up. I recently watched the new Dredd movie. I've seen it twice. I own it. It's a great movie.
Seriously?
Oh, it's cool.
Heard it's much better than it looked initially. I've not seen it, but I've heard good things about it.
It's pretty. It's pretty gory. If it's not your thing, is gore and some bad language and things like that. I definitely don't want my kids watch it. But the idea there is he's this gruff, police officer in a futuristic world, and she's basically a drug kingpin, and she runs this whole building and just. You don't mess with her, and she's just very raw. And like they say, there's no sexual tension whatsoever. It's just raw physical violence. And I think that matchup was interesting to me because I think in the end, obviously the hero wins, and the female dies. But in the storyline, I don't know if I'll go this far into it, but.
Spoiler warning for Dredd.
Spoiler warning for Dredd. Have you guys seen it?
No.
Are you going to see it?
This is our decaf with Dredd section.
I guess so. Yeah. This is just anyway. It's like in the story, the main characters are these cops, so they can actually carry out sentencing and basically kill people. So that's they can do all in one swift blow. So in the end, he comes against this female character, and I'm always like, okay, how do you? I mean, to me, it's like you don't see a lot of guys hitting girls, and if this whole thing has been about, physical violence. How is he going to do this?
Yeah, you definitely don't want that. I mean, there's no place that.
And they really
don't.
Anywhere. Yeah, they really don't do that. And I won't go into any more details, but it was interesting, the matchup. Like you said, it's not a typical matchup. It was something different. And so that's what was interesting to me about the idea in the film.
Well, and to be clear, I think that the reason it is a female character, it doesn't really matter because it's a character. It's a unique, interesting character that's a nice foil for Leia. It doesn't have to be a guy or a girl per se. And I think Leia is strong enough on her own that it really wouldn't make a difference. She's clearly shown through going head to head with Tarkin and Vader and all kinds of other characters throughout her history. That's not necessarily incredibly important, and it doesn't have to be about physical violence, whether it's a male villain or a female villain. It's the interplay and the tension.
I wish that wasn't important, but I think it is. So many people think so many different ways about gender, and what you said about dread was interesting because it's not like I'm going to advocate violence against women for its own sake, but I do think that within that concept of you can't show a female villain being defeated, there's a bit of sexism there itself because you're saying, oh, she's fragile and no matter how evil she is, you still shouldn't hit her because she'll break. And I can't think of, I was racking my brain trying to think of another big conflict between a male and a female that didn't have any tension.
I just thought of that one too. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, Hunger Games.
I don't know much about the later two books, so I can't really contribute there.
Now, which character? Read the first book, that was enough. But I did see the first two films, and I think the President and Katniss, there's an excellent interplay there between the two.
Well, that's more of a mind game thing too.
Well, and that's that's all that's necessary. But Megan brings up some really strong points. One of the things that makes Buffy the Vampire Slayer such a powerful show is
there you go. Yeah,
it's Buffy. Yeah. Buffy's not afraid to mix it up, and she definitely gets into her share of skirmishes, more than her share of skirmishes, and it just magnifies her character. And the tension that is there, the drama that is there, is very strong and palpable. Now, could Leia handle something like that? Would we as an audience accept Princess Leia in that sort of interplay with another character? I mean, when she's about to be tortured in A New Hope by that now very antiquated-looking robot with the syringe that's going towards her, the door slams down because we as an audience can't see that.
Yeah, which I think is appropriate. And we see Han being tortured later, but I don't know that it would be appropriate to linger on that for Leia, but everybody has a different. It's hard to talk about this stuff because everybody sees it from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. Jedi Academy video game, there was a female antagonist, but she sort of had a revealing costume, and there was a little bit of tension there if you played a male character, if I remember it correctly.
And that's one of the reasons why I like this character is that it wasn't about sexuality. It was about being a strong female power. And it didn't have to be about revealing clothing or some sort of sexual tension. It was just more about this is who this character is. And there's power in that.
Yeah.
You can use your sexuality or not, but this character, it wasn't. There were other things at play, other motivations, which is a nice thing to see.
I was going to say, one more example I think that popped in my head was Terminator 2 with Sarah Connor.
Oh, great example.
Versus the machine. Is it T-1000? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And she's buff, she's built, she's shooting guns. She's like an assassin. I mean, she's taking folks down physically again, like we were saying. And
and she's also vulnerable.
Vulnerable, right? Because it's her son, and she's trying to protect him, and she knew this was coming. Comparing her to Leia is obviously quite a difference there.
I think we've reversed our criteria a little. We're looking for male heroes who defeat female villains in order to illustrate a point about female heroes, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing. What's the difference there?
Yeah.
How do you parlay the two?
Well, like you were saying, though.
If it's a female, and maybe this is a huge tangent. Personally, I think this is pretty fascinating. But a female villain versus a male hero, And then what if you have a female hero versus a male villain? How do you write that cleverly and not just fall into the typical archetypes that have become so nauseating over the years?
Well, I can bring it back to Star Wars. We can take a look at Padme in the prequels. I mean, she stood up for herself. I led a nation, not led a world to against the Trade Federation. And what was going on there. Go ahead.
That reminds me, I have an actual example. Obi-Wan and Anakin at different times fighting Asajj Ventress. They beat her.
There you go.
I mean, she keeps coming back, but
yes.
Yeah, and what you reminded me of was the episode, I think it's called Assassin, one of my favorite Clone Wars episodes where Padme and Ahsoka fight Ventress. So, good. I'm glad you mentioned that.
There you go. And Ahsoka's a great character, too. We talk about female characters. There you go.
We could go on a whole tangent about that, but I think I would require time.
A lot more coffee.
Yeah.
And Ventress is an amazing character as well.
Yeah, she's one of my favorites, and I can't believe I didn't think of her earlier. Because
I know.
Shame on us, right?
Yeah.
That's right. Maybe did someone accidentally give us decaf? Is that the problem?
Maybe that was the
could be. Well, Megan, you had mentioned earlier your interview with Martha. Talk to us a little bit about that and how that came about. And we interviewed Martha on our last book chat. What an awesome person and a Star Wars presence. Very talented writer. Tell us your experiences with Martha.
Yeah, she was really nice. You guys probably got to know a little more of her personality than I did, because I spoke to her over email. But you can find her interview at blogfulofwords.blogspot.com. And
we'll certainly post a link to that as well, for sure.
Cool. I wanted to talk to her especially because female author writing female character, but also because she'd been a fan fiction writer. So we talked about that a little bit. And she was really nice. I think I had fun in my interactions with her, but our interactions were not particularly deep. It was pretty quick, but it was fun.
Yeah, she's very, very accommodating, very, very easy to work with.
Yeah,
which is great. And as are you, Megan. And while we have you on, what do you think? Is there a want or a need for a sequel to Razor's Edge?
Well, to me, Honor Among Thieves is the sequel to Razor's Edge. I would love to see another Leia book, but I hadn't been thinking about it because I'd been so set on seeing the Empire and Rebellion trilogy as a trilogy, which loosely followed each other. Now we've got this whole thing where maybe it's not a trilogy, the subtitle was removed, so I'm not sure what that means. I hope we still get the Luke novel. So I guess I feel like we are getting a sequel, because presumably Leia will be somewhere in the Han book. And I wouldn't complain about another Leia standalone novel either.
Well, and really, are there any unresolved threads from Razor's Edge that you would like to see come back? I know you mentioned your favorite character earlier, but is there anything in here that, because I can't imagine, and really to me, Razor's Edge was written because we want to know and see more about Leia and what makes her tick. But other than that, I don't know that there's a big call for some sort of a sequel, because I feel like everything was resolved pretty cleanly, and it's not like there's certain characters that are out there that I really want to follow more. Like, why am I drawing such a blank?
Annalene,
yes.
Yes.
There's Annalene ended up on Alderaan.
Yeah, I know. Not a good place to be, but there is no Annalene character really in Razor's Edge that I'd be curious to see more about.
Yeah, I agree. It was a very self-contained story, and although part of me would love to follow the pirates to more piratey adventures, it's hard for me to think of a full-length novel about them. And so I would say it wrapped itself up pretty well.
Yeah, my only thought would be, like you said, the pirates and maybe their misadventures, and maybe an ebook follow-up or maybe a prequel to this book of some sort. But I'm interested to kind of move on to Honor Among Thieves and see where that one goes. And I don't know if it's a direct.
Well,
sequel.
Martha pretty much. I didn't mean to cut you off, Cory.
No, go ahead.
Martha pretty much said that she had no idea what the other authors were doing. There was really not a lot of communication or interaction there, if memory serves from our interview. So I don't think we're going to see too many threads at all. Maybe the editors will throw a sentence in here or there.
I'm actually looking at the page right now as we speak, and the description describes a whole lot different to what Razor's Edge was about. But yeah, I'm interested to check it out.
I think that Honor Among Thieves will only be a sequel in that Leia will be in it because of what she said, Martha Wells, that is, said that about that she doesn't have much input into the other books. I think it's a sequel in the same way that the entire EU is a sequel, or are sequels to each other.
Nice. Yeah.
Because that's what I mean by sequel. It could be written by a different author and still be a sequel.
True, very true. Heck, how many? All of the Jedi Order was just like that too, really.
Yeah.
So now let's look at let's give our overall rating. And people can look up our reviews online anytime, but I'll just go first. I gave it a 3 out of 5, mostly because I thought that Leia was fleshed out beautifully and added to the narrative for me. Other than that, I didn't think it was a story that we were waiting around dying to hear about. But because of Martha's writing and her characterization, how she portrays Leia and Han and as individuals and together as an ensemble, that's where it raises it to a 3 out of 5 for me.
Can I give it an 8 out of 10? I need more numbers.
Sure, absolutely.
Sure, yeah.
I really liked it. It's one of the top, I would say, I read all 6, 7 Star Wars novels that came out this year, and it's number 1 or number 2 on my list.
Fascinating.
Where do you put Kenobi in that?
I have mixed feelings about Kenobi. That's another thing we could talk about forever. I thought the prose was really, really good, but talk about expectations. That book did not have... It didn't... Not that it didn't reach my expectations, because my expectations and what Jen Heddle and John Jackson Miller wanted that book to be were just different things. So, I have mixed feelings about Kenobi. But, yeah, Razor's Edge. I loved the characterization. There were some problems. The prose was a little boring at times, which is why I'm going to subtract 2 points. But otherwise...
So you're going to give it now a 6?
No, still 8. Yeah.
Oh, still 8.
She's out of 10, yeah.
Oh, I see. Well, let's just pretend that you had to pick it out of 5. Would you give that a 4 out of 5, 4.5?
3.5?
I'd say it sounds like a 3.5.
Yeah,
maybe 3.75, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, what about you, Cory?
I'm going to start with you on that, Dan. I agree. It was a really solid 3. And I'll be honest, I hadn't read it until I read your review. I was just kind of late in the game. And I was just I was busy. And
sure.
And you said, hey, check out my review. And I was like, okay. So I read your review, and your review actually helped me get into it. And I was like, oh, this is interesting and fascinating. And I wanted to know why you thought those things. So, I got to get into it and dug into it. But, yeah, like we said, the storyline was good. I don't think it was great. But like we said, Martha did a great job of characterizing Leia and really fleshing the story along as far as that went. And the interplay, like we've been saying all along, these characters are hard and difficult to write for anybody, I think, just because it's such a beloved saga for anybody who's getting into these books. And I love the fact that Megan loved it, and because she's, you got a lot out of it that you wanted to get out of it, and I think the book is going to do what it's supposed to do for each fan, and they're going to, love it or hate it for those reasons. And if that's the case, then, Martha did a good job in telling a story. I think it's a solid 3 out of 5, and it definitely needs to be picked up and read, and to, just to pique people's interest and to see what they think about it too.
Well, particularly if you're a Leia fan, and I think anyone who's listening to Megan talk about it, Megan is making me actually want to reread the book, which I didn't think I would ever do. So that's cool. I really think that Martha Wells, I don't know what Delroy had instructed her to do or requested that she do, would probably be a better way to phrase it. I think with the keys to the particular vehicle she was given, I think she got the best mileage out of it that she possibly could, if we could extend that metaphor. Because there really weren't, it's between episodes 4 and 5. There's only so far you can go with her and Han. So they really looked at her being a leader with all this doubt in her mind and turmoil, and see these weaknesses in her that ended up being strengths because of how she uses them and doesn't let them weigh her down. So I think as far as adding to Leia's character, if you are a Leia fan or even a remote Leia fan, I think Razor's Edge is a book that you cannot miss. So Megan, of course, we've got our 5 questions that we want to ask you, kind of yes or no, one word, one sentence answers that we like to ask all of our guests here on Coffee with Kenobi. So I'm going to start with asking you, what is your favorite Star Wars movie?
Return of the Jedi.
Wow.
Wow, that's
Usually.
becoming a favorite around here.
Yeah, that is. You're the third person in a row to say that. It might overtake Empire.
Okay, your favorite character of the saga?
I'll go with Luke. There are a lot of favorites, but Luke is a good one.
Your favorite line of dialogue or film moment?
Oh no. Film moment. Some sort of acrobatic flip that Darth Maul does in episode 1.
Oh, cool.
The fight choreography in the Duel of the Fates. The whole thing. How about that?
Oh yeah, Nick Gilliard really bringing it right there.
Yes.
Okay, if you collect, what is your favorite collectible that you own?
I collect only very few things, very random things. I gotta think about this for a moment. I'm gonna go back to Darth Maul again. I have a small collection of Darth Maul figures, and I have one that was at Celebration 5, and the gentleman manning the booth who was selling the action figures had a set, and there was one Darth Maul with, he had his regular black cloak, but it had red trim on the side, and I said, can I have just that one without the set? And at first he was like, but finally he gave it to me. So I like that one because it's different, and because the vendor was nice to me.
That's pretty cool. Are you a Black Series person, the 6-inch?
To be honest, I'm not enough of a collector to be able to know what figure is what series. I just know if I look at them and I think they look cool.
Wow, in many ways I envy you for that.
But I know every Star Wars novel, so I've got my own little
Yes, you've definitely
sometimes annoying database.
You've definitely placed a strong niche for yourself. And finally, what particular messages or themes about the Star Wars saga resonate or speak to you?
Good versus evil, the ability to gain your dreams, to become what you want to become.
Yeah, and I think that's a good, strong message for people, especially when you're growing up with these films, seeing the power of choice too. So I like that, and everybody likes. It's the Harry Potter thing. Everybody likes to believe that they're destined for something else, and you compared yourself to Luke and getting off the Tatooine many times anyway. So that makes sense.
I've become a little cynical about that over getting out of college because Luke didn't pull himself up by his own bootstraps. He had Obi-Wan to help him.
Absolutely.
And I think that in a way that teaches a bad lesson that we have to wait for someone to come rescue us. But that's a tangent, and I really do like the message of that anyone can have heroism in them. And
oh boy.
Yeah.
You just opened up.
I just thought of a great question. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay,
No, that's perfect.
Don't be sorry. Seriously, that's really fascinating. What were you going to say about that, Cory?
Well, she mentioned how Obi-Wan kind of had to bring Luke out of Tatooine and kind of boost him along and get him going. I got thinking, I was like, what if Luke would have just went off and got those what's he trying to get?
Power
converters, yeah. What if he went and got power converters instead of cleaned up the droids? Yeah, no, I don't know. Well, I'm a big what if guy.
The Force.
He would have got there eventually, right? If he was going to go join the rebellion and
the rebellion against the Empire.
Yeah.
See, I think that there was a really narrow window there, and Luke could have missed his chance, and he'd start having Force visions and not know where they came from.
Well, this is that's pretty cool, and it's Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey. It's as old as Merlin and King Arthur and before that, but the mentor, the old mentor, has to come down and has to pass the baton, the talisman, to the hero, so that the hero can go on his journey, and he has to lose his father figure. It's all myth. I mean, Joseph Campbell said that George Lucas was his best student, so it does pose a lot of interesting questions of free will versus destiny. Definitely more of a sorting hat discussion.
And I love that hero story. I've just looked at it, and this is another great thing about Star Wars and fandom in general. As I age and go through different stages of my life, I look at it differently, and I'm sure everybody does that too. So that could be a whole other discussion.
Oh, absolutely. And just every time you look at this stuff, and even our listeners who are listening to it now are probably talking to the podcast and they have the different ways of looking at it too, just by different things that we've all talked about on this show. And Cory, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, the Star Wars grows with you. And because we're fans of the saga, it's going to continue to grow with us as we get older and look back on our life. And, whatever situation we're in that moment, we're going to relate it to the saga in our own way. And like you said, you're, just moving along with your life, and you equate that to, your favorite film moment at the time, so.
Yeah.
Good
and I
point.
think Luke is one of my favorites because everyone can see themselves in him.
Yes.
And in different ways, too. So
Yeah,
that's cool.
For sure. Okay, well, Megan, thank you so much for coming on for our book review of Razor's Edge. I know it's something we've been talking about for months, having you on the show. I think it was even before was it just after it was released?
probably, because we had originally talked about Razor's Edge, so it must have been somewhere around there.
I think so, or shortly after we got review copies of it, because it was definitely something that we knew there was plenty to talk about. And I think Cory, I speak for Cory when I say just what you brought to the discussion. I didn't know if we were going to talk for 20 minutes, half hour, and we've been going on for over an hour, and there's probably so much more we could do. So thank you so much, Megan, for bringing your insights into this discussion. And where can our listeners find you and interact with you?
Your listeners can find me at blogfullofwords.blogspot.com. On Twitter, it's pretty much the same thing, at blogfullofwords. I also write for Knight's Archive and occasionally Fangirl blog.
Very good, and we will certainly put all of those links on our show notes. So, Megan, thank you again very much for having a cup of coffee with us, and we look forward to having you on a show in the future.
Great, thanks for having me.
If you'd like to respond to our question of the show, have a comment, or just want to say hello, send us an email at feedback@coffeewithkenobi.com. Or if you have a specific question or comment for either of us individually, email us at danz@coffeewithkenobi.com or coryc@coffeewithkenobi.com, or visit us at coffeewithkenobi.com and click on the Contact Us section, or comment on one of the stories featured on the site. If you enjoy the show, please write a review on iTunes or listen to us on the Zune Windows Media Marketplace. You can also like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi, as well as keep up to date at our Twitter feed at twitter.com/coffeewithkenobi. You can also find us on Tumblr at coffeewithkenobi.tumblr.com. If you enjoy the jazz music, download the album Eye to Eye by Steve Torok on iTunes.
Give the evacuation code signal.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited and is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names and sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney or their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi, unless otherwise indicated.
There's no one here. Move along. Move along.